Good evening, everybody. Good evening, everybody. It's the Truth Serum. Doing something different. Gonna get a little mob stuff in. John Gotti Jr. did an interview, a long, highly anticipated interview, which I think PBD's been trying to get him for 7, 8 years to do an interview, and I got it right here. You know how I do it, and I've really changed my opinion on when it comes to the Gottis and John Gotti Jr. It's when you sit back like an armchair quarterback, and then John Gotti Jr. Cooperated and everything like that. I've been very animated about that kind of stuff, but when it comes to John Gotti Jr. and everything that the government has thrown at him for years and years and years, just for bearing the Gotti name, and time after time after time, they just go after him, just completely. It's sickening. It's really sickening. All right, so let's get this party started. See where they're at here.
Kennedy, you're going to be tied to the Kennedy family. You got Trumps, you got Bush, you got Rockefeller.
Let's see.
But when it comes down to this last name,
and
first name, you know where it goes, and it's John Gotti. And today, after I think 6 years of us trying to do this interview.
Oh, 6.
Is it 7 years? 7 years. We're finally doing this, John.
Yeah, at the fight.
This is at the fight.
My son Johnny's fight.
At the fight. That's right. Good memory. Yes, at the fight.
His pro debut.
I remember that. And I had something going. I don't know what it was. I'm like, he was talking to Crit.
I could understand why Gotti Jr. hasn't wanted to do any interview, because when you're so entangled in the spotlight, the feds charging him so many times, he don't want to do any interviews. The guy wants to live his life with his family. I believe Junior is the same age as me. I'm 61. He's either 60 or 61. No, this is Patrick Paul Dave.
But it's great to have you here.
It's my pleasure to be here.
It's great to have you.
An honor.
Yes, likewise. And for me, when I accidentally got into this world of interviewing, the world and different folks, and it was always, Pat, you got to get John. You got to get John. You got to get John. I'm like, look, we got to figure out a way to make this work. And I'm glad we finally did. I got so many things I want to talk to you about. I mean, your history, family, things that are going on today, things that are going on both politically, how some things are legal today that used to be illegal, where some of the stuff that the life was doing. But starters, just very basic question before we get into the story. John, how much of the life still exists today? Like, are they still acting like active gangsters, mobsters in America?
I'm so far removed. I'm about 26 years removed from that life. I'm only 15 years removed from prison. So you're incorporated when you're in prison. You're on the compound. You're doing time with a lot of fellas from the streets. You have to understand what RICO did to understand where the status of where that lifestyle is today. Okay, RICO was a law that was basically constructed, sort of in the beginning as a civil law. It was good, and it's Robert Blakey. He's a Notre Dame law professor. He constructed the law to be used civilly at first, and then he slowly evolved to use it in the criminal aspect.
We know what RICO is. They come in. But what the question he asked them was, does the mob still exist today? Is in some fashion? And I haven't watched this. Honestly, I haven't watched this. But what I've been saying for a long time is, no, the mob doesn't exist today. How's it going to exist? What's the rackets going to be? The casinos are all over the place. You can bet sports. If you're dealing drugs, just go to your pharmacy. They're the new drug dealers. So the government picked up the rackets. Now, I don't know about forgeries and high-tech crimes and titles and things like that, but there's that type of crime, but that's not associated under some umbrella of the Lucchese or Gambino. That's my opinion. The mob doesn't exist today. It doesn't exist. The people that will tell you that is that they just they want to romanticize it and things like that. But let's see what he's got to say.
And civilly in 1970, I believe it was first introduced as a law, if my memory serves me right. And then by 1979, I want to say, 1979 into 1980, they made 2 criminal indictments. I believe those were the first 2 criminal indictments. One was against a guy named Frank Thierry, who they accused of being the leader of the West Side, the Genovese family. And again, when I say the names of families, these are names that the government and the media had established. I don't know these names. They know these names. They establish them for the press and they identify various names. But he was accused of being the shot caller for that group. And then you had a guy named Tony Provenzano, who was the union leader.
Tony Provenzano. That name has been associated, that last name, the Provenzanos, with the New York Giants football team and Batavia Downs racetrack with the Maras.
Well, the Teamsters union leader that was always adverse and at loggerheads with Jimmy Hoffa out of New Jersey. So they were respectively in 79, 80. 2 indictments came about.
I haven't been able to take my husband's pants.
Are you cracking jokes?
What happened afterward was unbelievable. I thought it would be just
Tony Provenzano.
Tony Provenzano, yep. And he died while in prison. They both were convicted of RICO. Now, I remember driving in the car with my dad, and my father saying to me, he had said that in 79, he came home in 77. Did the state bid, he came home in 77 August, and we're driving in the car, and he heard it on 1010 Wins News. My father used to always put on 1010 Wins News. That's always was his car. And if he went to music, it would be Jimmy Roselli or Engelbert Humperdinck. But he had 1010 Wins News on.
Engelbert.
And when it came over the radio about the first conviction, and again, my memory doesn't serve me correct, which one fell first. I want to say Tony Provenzano, that he fell first. Indictments, like I said, were within a year. My father said, that's the beginning of the end. I remember him turning to me and saying, and I didn't understand what he meant. I didn't find it because I'm in military school at the time. I was a bit naive to certain things.
But at this point, you already know how Dad makes money.
Well, you know what? You pretty much understand when you come from Howard Beach, and the only way I can really closely make the public understand it, you have to make a correlation. And the correlation would be, you ever seen a movie, The Town?
Of course.
Okay, with Ben Affleck.
Great movie. It's the famous line, right?
Well, I was away with a lot of those guys. A lot of those guys I was in Raybrook with, all good, solid kids, Irish kids. They had lived in that conclave there. You couldn't. There's only one way in, one way out. How they used to pinch those kids when they used to do a score is they block the bridge and get them every time coming back one or the other. Well, Howard Beach is very similar.
Howard Beach.
There's only 2 ways. One way in off Cross Bay Boulevard and the back way dumping into Brooklyn. Close-knit. Everybody's the same. More than not, people will like my father. I wasn't unique that my father was in prison. My next-door neighbor's father was in prison, or uncle or cousin or somebody else was in prison for similar situations. They were all part of the street element. So really, if you were Italian-American and you lived there, you were more so inclined to know or be a part of that life or having relationships than not. If the answer would be not, then you were the odd duck. You were the exception. I was the rule. Okay, you would be the exception. And
now he's talking about what was leading up to the RICO thereafter and everything. When I went up to the falls to be a little errand boy and run around and things like that, if I ever had to deliver the milk or bread, I established the old man Sam, God rest his soul, the boss. I had to establish, because I didn't like phones, I had to establish code words. And half the people thought I was silly or anything, but more times when something happened, Sam, the boss, or somebody close to him, immediately close member of his biological family, would just say, come up and have lunch, come up and have dinner, let's go to the racetrack, and things like that. And if anything else had to be uttered in an emergency or something, or just in a timely fashion, I would just have to say, tickets to the ball game, tickets to this or that, and just put things in code, because I was a nobody. I wasn't a made man. And I was just like trying to just think things out and not to ever, because they had, they were bugging everything left and right. They were bugging everything left and right. But the mob, some mob families or crews or clubhouses would have the best high-tech technological guys that can sweep a place and know where the bugs are. There was very intelligent people that were smarter than the government as far as bugging, because they could say this is like a surveillance to listen to, say this mic, just for an example. So you could point this 200 yards, and you could hear what somebody's saying. Now the FBI had equipment like that, but a lot of it wasn't as highly advanced. So you can surveil the FBI when they're coming out of their wherever they are, if they're in the open air, or you can just chill, watch them, sit down. If they're at a food court and they're talking to another agent, you could just sit there under your jacket and have a hat on with a little piece, and you could hear every word they're saying. They had higher technology like MIT, high-tech stuff. So no matter, my position was, no matter where I am or whatever I'm doing, I am never saying I didn't participate in violent criminal activities and things like that. And half the wise guys, they never uttered stuff to me. It's go to the racetrack, let's go eat. I'm picking them up from bars. I'm just a driver for them. And then I did a couple other things that are just nothing compared to the blood and guts of the mob. So I was always careful. If somebody was drunk and they said something at 3 a.m, I'd just say, "What are you talking about? I don't know," and they were drunk, they didn't know. So there was no way I had it in my mind that I'm gonna just, I would talk in code to some of the guys, they would get aggravated, and I would just say, "That's the way Sam wants it. That's the way Sam wants it." Because a lot of these guys, they were with strippers and girls, and they were just yap, 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 yap. They're talking, and it's not good. Just the bread and milk runs, Joel Gold. Gotta deliver that bread and milk.
You were that guy that didn't really know any better, or didn't have a friend, or didn't know somebody who was in the street life. You were the exception. Because the rule was we all knew each other. We were real tight there, and you couldn't come in or out without us knowing about it. And that's basically the way it went down. So at that point, you're growing up, you get an understanding. Your father's a bit different. He used to list on his taxes, he's the professional gambler. I just scratch my head. What exactly is a professional gambler? I'm not quite sure.
I put that out on the taxes too, professional gambler, because I did make scores at the racetrack also. So if anybody's new in here, I ran around, delivered the milk. I was an errand boy, and my godfather did a lot of work. He was a gunner for Colombo's and some other families. He wasn't made. He was just an outsider that did work. He wasn't made. He did his work and he got paid. He kept all the cash. It's not just like members of these crews that go out and they pull off all these capers and then they got to hand the money up to the captain and underboss. No, my godfather, it was like when a company outsources and maybe a boss and a captain doesn't want the rest of their crew to know who's gonna whack somebody. They didn't share. The bosses and underbosses and captains didn't just share all the information throughout the hierarchy of the family. A lot of times things were just hush hush, and if a boss or underboss or a captain wanted somebody gone, boom, there was guys like my godfather that would just take it. They would take it and do it. And he could do work for the Gambinos 1 week, and then the next week he could do work for Luke Casey the next week. His only allegiance was to the money. Ben Franklin. That's all. His only allegiance was to the money. He had a real high IQ, and he got pinched a couple times with everybody gets pinched here or there, like of course that's obvious. So let's listen up to when he mentioned Provenzano, when he's talking about the RICO, the Provenzano family was the beginning owners of the harness racetrack Batavia Downs, historically speaking. Provenzano, to me, is a royalty name that Mafia Tube and Mob Tube has never heard of. Never heard of Provenzano. YouTube and Mob Tube is only gives you 10%. But a lot of other people, we're all 60. I think Gotti Jr. is 60, 61.
And my mother always was that, solid rah-rah person in his corner. She adored my father, never asked questions, but P.S., she would stand up. She'd go nose to nose with him if she had to. Or if someone, God forbid, would say something negative about my father, she would take you to task. She would tighten your ass up really quick, my mother. So she didn't we couldn't get those. If I was a kid and I was inquisitive and I would want to ask that question to my mother, she would say, your father provides very well for us. That would be the response. So you'd have to go out into the streets to learn about what's going on, what time it really is.
Did she grow up in the same streets? Like, did they meet?
No.
See, people could say a lot on all these armchair YouTube channels and whatnot, and they could say, oh, Gotti Jr. was a rat, this and that. They attacked John Gotti Jr., the government, more times than any other person on planet Earth. Him right here. And I respect and admire his intelligence and his communication skills and his lawyer skills.
It's a great story. My mother's from Long Island City. My father's a Brooklyn guy. Okay,
Brooklyn
from the Bronx, evolved from the Bronx, but raised in Brownsville, East New York, Brooklyn area. Okay, home of Murder Incorporated. Albert Anastasia was his idol growing up. And they had met one day. My mother was 17 years old, and she was applying for a barmaid job. She was in Brooklyn, hitting the circuit, trying to get a barmaid job. And she was being harassed by a guy who followed her out of one of the interviews. So she looked into a bar, and she seen a group of gentlemen sitting at the end of the bar, opened the door and walked in. And she says, excuse me. She said, do you mind I sit here? This guy's bothering me. Some guy's bothering me. My father's sitting there. He's a 19-year-old young punk, if you want to say it, okay, with a three-quarter leather jacket. He's sitting there, the hair's slicked back. He says, who's bothering you? And she says, well, no, this guy's he's just following me, and I just feel very uncomfortable. He says, sit right over here. The guy opens the bar door and looks in.
Senior was a real good street fighter with his hands.
Sees my mother sitting with my father at the bar and just turns, and my father shoots him a look, and he just runs out. And they began to talk at that point. She was 17. He was 19. They moved in together a short time later, and they were never separated.
Wow.
What a love story. What a love story. Senior was in the bar, or somebody was messing with his future wife, and the guy ran out. He was her hero right off the bat. What a love story.
Prison only separated them. Only prison separated them.
Wow. So when she, like, at what point did she, I mean, even if you know some of these stories, at what point did she know how he provides?
His friends. You go into the Copacabana.
Yeah.
Okay, you go to, and that's where my father would take my mother as his girlfriend, as his bride as his wife. Constant companion was Angelo Ruggiero, who was my father's boyhood friend since they were 10 years old. My Aunt Marie, my Uncle Angelo's wife, became very close to my mother.
Everyone's got an Aunt Marie.
You'd see the characters there. You knew exactly what you were dealing with when you walked into Copacabana. You knew you weren't at the Friars Club.
So she kind of got an idea. She's like,
very intelligent woman, my mother, very perceptive. She understood what time it was.
Now, let me ask you, is the culture of when you get into it, because when my wife and I were getting ready to get married, I told her, I said, listen, I don't know what you're looking for for a husband.
Right.
I'm going to be running, gunning, and this is going to be the life. Are you okay with it?
Yeah.
Did they have that conversation or no? It's just...
Absolutely. Absolutely. And in fact, it reminds me of a story years later. My mother would get a little, when things really got complicated, this is like 1985, things got really complicated. And he became now, my father was a local hero, local celebrity in Howard Beach, Brooklyn, in the boroughs, but nobody knew him. He was a local guy. There was a news story I remember when I was in military school about the Garment Center, and it was the first time I ever seen my father on TV. I had seen him on TV, and that was like 1980, 81 that this flashed on. But now, 85, he was basically pushed onto the world stage. The media made him created this Dapper Don situation, this character they created, and it became very complicated life at that point. Everywhere now we had to be, on our guard, basically. And my mother, at some point, post 85, my father got pinched in 86. He went back in. They remanded his bail. He was indicted he was indicted in March of 85 on a racketeering case, which he was the first to beat any of the RICO cases. And he was remanded. His bail was remanded in 86, April, I believe. Frankie DiCicco was killed in a car bomb. And a short time later, they had a hearing, and they decided to take my father off the street in 86. He came home. We beat the case. First one to win the RICOs. Everybody fell. Commission case.
Why is that? Why did he beat him? Is it law?
Now, remember this, folks. His father was the first one to beat the RICO case. And 99.999, they got a RICO on you, you're done. Unless you cooperate. And it just go, well, let him continue, because I know he's getting back.
Fear, is it connection?
Well,
is it?
The government would want you to believe that my father...
Well, that is the reason why, after Senior was gone, and they still had a bad taste in their mouth, because if you're just a Gotti, you're like the devil when it comes to the feds. So, the father embarrassed them and beat so many charges so many times, and then this poor kid comes along and they do the same thing and worse. They indicted him so many times and kept him in court for years and years and years.
Fixed the case, okay? And they actually, through that Gravano character, they said that they got to a juror. Now, let's be a devil's advocate. Let's say Gravano was correct, said it did happen. Let's say he got to the juror. What about the other 11? They didn't exist? There's 12 juries. Last I remember, the felony federal case in America, I've tried many, there's 12 jurors that decide your fate. So let's pretend that John Gotti did get to that juror. Let's pretend, okay? What about the other 11 jurors that voted not guilty? Okay? They all had their own mindsets. So all 12 across the board voted not guilty, and John was the first one. And you're asking me, why do I believe he won the case? I'm going to tell you why. Bruce Cutler, at that time, the case started out with Neil Delacroce as the lead defendant, and John Gotti, my father, was accused of being a captain under Neil, and he was the second defendant, and then they had 7 more co-defendants right on down the line, including my Uncle Gene. And the lead attorney was Barry Slotnick on that case. Barry Slotnick represented Neil Delacroce, and Bruce Cutler, who was a disciple, was under Barry Slotnick, took my father as the second seed. Once Neil Delacroce died of cancer, Barry Slotnick thought he was going to take my father as the lead defendant. My father says no. I came to the dance with Bruce. Bruce is going to stay right here. And that was the creation. And what we got to see, Pat, was an evolution of 2 individuals. I've never seen anything like this. It was magnificent to watch. Okay. Bruce Cutler, here's a guy that his father, Murray, was a NYPD police officer, became an attorney. Bruce Cutler was a prosecutor at the Brooklyn DA's office, someone that John Gotti would hate. He would hate any prosecutor, and he would hate his father for being a cop. Okay, my father would, on the norm, would say, I wouldn't even talk to you. You're a prosecutor, and your father's a cop. Hit the bricks. But that was the lawyer. That was the structure that when Neil got the case, Barry Slotnick came on board. My father was assigned Brucey, but they developed an amazing rapport. And I saw Bruce evolve almost into an alter ego of John Gotti's.
Mm.
And he had the balls to stand up and actually perform, to go against the government, to say exactly what he felt, to take the indictment that was trash, that was so ill-prepared, to throw it into the garbage pan and say, this is rancid. And the jurors watched his theatrics. They were won over. They saw how John Gotti composed himself. They saw how he comported himself. And I think a lot of them began to fall slightly in love with him, or, evolve to liking his character and how, the humor. One of the co-defendants was a gentleman named Lenny DiMaria. Very funny, very witty guy. Like, he would say little jokes in between, little quips in between. And I think it was the combination, the chemistry of those individuals that were on trial that won that jury over. The chemistry of those, along with Bruce Cutler and these personality of lawyers, the Santangelo.
They had pizzazz. They had pizzazz. And of course, he beat a lot of cases. Now, that Cutler was sharp as they come. And his father was a cop, and he was a district attorney. He was a DA at one point. He switched over to be a defense attorney. Hey, Vegas Pete, Joel Goldbig. We're checking out John Gotti Jr., talking to PPD, and here we go again.
Brothers, Richie Raybach, and so on, the personality of those attorneys on that case, I believe that's what won the day.
Commercial.
This homemade salt trick makes you rock hard.
What the hell?
Now, you're born 64. That's 86. So you're 22 when this is happening. So you're there every day. You're watching.
Well, the trial was 87. The trial started in 86.
Okay.
And the culmination, it ended in March of 87.
When he beat it. When he beat RICO.
Yes.
This has never happened before.
Never happened.
Okay, so when that happened, did other made men or whoever, were they sitting there saying, who's the lawyer you used? Yeah. We can beat these guys.
Cutler.
Let's use the same method. Is that kind of what became the model?
Bruce became a very sought-after attorney at that point, because he was nobody. He was an unknown attorney at that point. He was basically a second seat to Barry Slotnick, who was a very well-known attorney. But Brucey was like a newly anointed, one of those assistants that would come in, that you'd throw him on a case with you. And a lot of times what the lawyers did, they were cute. So what they would do is they would say, they couldn't wait for a bunch of guys for a big indictment. One of these groups get indicted, 12 guys, 13 guys. And if they knew, for example, like Barry Slotnick knew he had Neil Delacroce, he would come with 2 or 3 of his lawyers and say, hey, Neil, let's put this one with John Gotti. Let's put this one with this one. So he'd get more money. They get more work for his firm, and they would have the case on lockdown. They'd have the case on lockdown.
Dream team.
So, yeah, that was normally what would happen there.
In 85, 86, is Roy Cohn, does he still carry the same kind of weight? Or
I think he died by then. He died of AIDS by then.
Did he die in 86? What year did he die?
I think maybe 84.
Roy Cohn.
Early 80s. He contracted AIDS, and he died young.
But can you pull up what year was it? 80, okay, 86. So
86 he died.
But at that time, he's no longer as active, right? He had already slowed down. Did he still carry
He wasn't practicing anymore. And I know for a fact that 86, 85, he was no longer practicing. He was very sick. He was deathly ill.
At what point would you say, did you ever have a chance to meet Roy or no?
I did briefly in Manhattan one night at Harry's Bar in the Helmsley Palace.
What year was that?
That was 83, I want to say.
So that's 3 years before he died. So was he already sick, and was he already going through it or no?
Somewhat.
Okay.
Somewhat.
And what did your dad think about him?
He used to often tell a story, and the difference between when he would try to lecture me, if I had a comfort level and I had a case, because my first trial, I was 22 years old. It was 87, my first trial.
Damn.
And when my father was on trial, he beat in March. I beat my case in June. So we were basically on trial together, my father. He was in the federal court. I was in the state system on trial. So I was comfortable with an attorney named Mike Coral. And he was the go-to guy from Queens. by us. And it was like almost like a family to us, very close to my father, my uncles, and everybody else. So I told my dad, with my case, I said, Dad, I want to go with Mike Coro. And he says, no, I got the lawyer for you. You're going to go with this attorney right here. I said, but I'm comfortable. He says, look, listen to me, kid. He said, let me explain a story to you. And he told me that when he got indicted on the McBratney case, okay, and this is a case that there were multiple eyewitnesses. McBratney, I don't know if you're familiar with the case. McBratney was the leader of an Irish crew that were kidnapping Italian bookmakers and Italian money guys and holding for ransom. And ultimately, they kidnapped a guy named Manny Gambino, a relative of Carl Gambino's, okay? And I believe a ransom was paid, if I understood the story correctly, and they killed him anyway. So at that point, there was a search and destroy mission, whereas that each group put together 3 different individuals to hunt down this Irish crew and wipe them out and kill them all. And my father was very successful. And the last one was the leader, was his name was McBratney, James McBratney. He was the last one to be tracked down and killed. And on that case, there was a barmaid as a witness. There were patrons in the bar that were witnesses. Tough case to beat. He was a fugitive. He went on a lam. And he was tricked into coming in, my father, by a cooperator. He saved his life. Meanwhile, years later, the guy was he was a co-defendant in my dad's 85 case, but he was exposed as a cooperator. Tricked to coming in. He was pinched at that meeting, and then he had to stand trial for the McBratney killing. So at that point, a move is made. Carl Gambino and Neil Delacroce move aside Mike Coro, and Roy Cohn steps in. Now, my father telling the story that Mike Coro's sitting there, and he's almost pleading with the judge to try to get a delay in the case. And I'm sitting there, my father's saying, and Mike's sitting there, and the judge is showing him no respect at all. He's showing him absolutely no respect at all. Like, no. He says, John, on cue, the doors burst open, and Roy Cohn, this little diminutive man, walks in, and he's not even paying attention. It's like he's aloof. His glasses are down. He's reading something. He's just like walking by, and people are trying to say hello, and he's not even acknowledging them. He's just walking right past them. Like, yeah, he's walking right by, okay? And he gets to the front. And he says, how are you, Your Honor? He says, Roy Cohn here for John Gotti. My father's looking. You don't know Roy Cohn. He's looking at him. Mike Coro's my lawyer, you know. And he's saying, well, Mike. So no. So Mike's whispering to Roy, and Roy tells him, sit down. And he sits down.
You got to be kidding me.
And he says, Your Honor, we're asking for an extension here. And he says, John, the whole vibe in the courtroom changed. Everything completely changed. Like that. The judge gave the extension. Next thing you know, he negotiated the plea. 7 years, multiple witnesses. He was accused of murder. 7 years. I had to do 3 years on this. I do that standing on my head in the box, he said. 3 years he did, and Roy orchestrated that plea. So,
wow.
Talk about power.
Is that the first time you met him?
Roy must have had some other type of deals going on in the background, because they weren't giving these guys a breath of air. They were running these defendants into the ground. You could never get an extension. Roy comes in with a grand entrance. We need an extension. Okay, Roy. You know, a lot of times these counsels, attorneys, they had a rapport in the background. A lot of them had relationships with them in the background, because those judges weren't coming up for air on anything. You're going to come in through the door, make a grand entrance. Any other judge would be like, you know, reprimanding him. No, he comes in, makes a request to delay it a little bit, and he goes right along with it.
No, my father met him for the first time.
That's the first time your father met him.
Yeah, I've never met him. I met him later on in life.
83, right.
Up to that point.
So at this point, when he just walks in,
right,
he has no idea he's going to walk in.
No idea.
But he knows who he is. Or he doesn't.
He knows who he is. He knows he did a lot of work.
Reputation.
Did a lot of work for Carl. He did a lot of work for Neil. But he knew of him. Never met him.
Did you watch the recent movie that came out called The Apprentice? The story of Joe Pesci?
Okay. No.
Because he's the main character in the movie that makes it.
Right.
What was his business model for having the kind of power that he had? Was it the OG blackmail business model? Is that what he had?
It goes back to McCarthyism. I mean, he was powerful back then. Senator McCarthy, when he saw something, he saw a quality in this young Roy Cohn. And again, I've never watched anything on Roy Cohn, but it's an observation that you're making when you're reading books and things of that nature. Having only met him one time, and bits and pieces of tidbits of stories that my father had told me, that there was a persona there. He was sort of identified as the prince of the Velvet Mafia. And you know what the Velvet Mafia was? Velvet Mafia was the underground of New York, the gay community, that these guys had a lot of powerful, influential people were there, and Roy knew everything. Roy knew all the bodies were buried. He knew who was who and what was what, okay? He knew what high-ranking individuals, what judges, everybody played a different role.
The Velvet Mafia.
That's what we used to call them back in the day.
The Velvet Mafia they were gays. They were gays. And when I a couple of times in my travels, going to the club, going to New York or whatever, you'd run into some of the guys, but they could be a masculine and gay, but some of them were a little, I don't know, a little fruity maybe, and you'd be like, they have no problems doing crimes.
Gay men who help.
There you go.
Shit,
I've never even seen this before.
That's wild. The Velvet Mafia.
Yeah.
So is it like when you say what they knew the bodies were buried? Is it like they knew who liked men and they knew who came to those parties?
They knew.
It's today. Wow. Today, you and I, society, we accept everything. We accept if you're a good person, you're a good person. Whatever your choices are. Okay. Then they did not. Then in the 50s, 60s, 70s, they discriminated against people. It could not happen. So it was like almost a sin to be gay back then, okay? Because society was harsh on that. Religion was harsh on that.
Well,
Roy,
I came up to the club, new guy, and college educated, and I was going to run around. There was a steel brokerage business, and they were doing a bookmaking operation, and I would run whatever, and I would try to be, I would be submissive, but then I made a couple mistakes when I had to defend myself. These crew, they talk smack. They're talking smack about this or that, and then they wanted to go to strip joints, and I never wanted to go inside the strip joints. So they thought I was a little fruity because they had never saw me with a woman. I would just do my thing, drive them around, and I didn't want to participate with strippers and running all over town, be a whore master and all that. And they were, like he said, not like today, but I would hear a couple of things and I'd be like, I like women, okay? No, because a couple times they'd be with these strippers and hoes, and they would get one for me, and I'd be like, no, and they'd be like, thinking I'm gay or something, and they'd be hollering. I was like, I don't want that pig. I don't want that pig. I could get women, no problem, out in the real world. But yeah, they then they'd make some remarks, but the old man, would quiet it down because, then eventually they knew, I wasn't gay or anything, but back then they didn't like that. But they did have that velvet fruity pies.
Was that, and he was the guy who knew all the secrets and all the answers, and understanding also, this is even before that point of the Velvet Mafia in the 60s into the 70s. Remember, he was a powerful attorney in his own right, won a string of cases. McCarthy saw him and wanted this kid. He wanted this young guy, this brash young gentleman. He wanted them next to him, guide him on the law, and then they began to go through the blacklisting of Hollywood and the communism trials and all that other stuff. And that was the McCarthyism, the era of McCarthyism. That was the beginning of it. His power with the Senate.
Joe McCarthy.
And then it evolved into what you see, the Velvet Mafia.
Wow. Did your dad ever tell you a story about the time that somebody wanted to kill him and take him out? Because that's too much power. Roy.
I've never heard that. No.
Okay. No. Yeah, because you think about having, and by the way,
the government, if anybody, when you say somebody would want to kill him, I would probably say, if you see what's going on today now, like with this P. Diddy trial and Jeffrey Epstein, when he hung himself.
Don't worry about the people taking you out. Worry about the government taking you out. These days.
Okay.
Allegedly.
Yeah, well, I was in that unit. It's pretty tough that all the cameras failed. But anyway, that being said, when you see today, when people have that kind of information, when they possess that wealth of information on other powerful individuals, sometimes you outlive your useful purpose and you become expendable.
Well, how many people, you see the way they raided P. Diddy's compound? Because all those powerful people, all those entertainers, all those actors, musicians, athletes, LeBron James in hiding, all them are sitting back thinking, wow, I'm on tape. I'm on videotape doing this and that and this and that and all this other stuff. So you ain't got to worry about gangsters. You got to worry about, you got to worry about the government.
And Roy Cohn was a very powerful individual that knew a lot on a lot of different people. So, maybe AIDS did them a favor, did some powerful individuals a favor. But I don't know if someone would have wanted to kill him. If anybody would want to kill him, I would believe maybe it'd be somebody within the government or some high executive, some big business.
Yes.
It's only speculative.
Elon Musk allegedly has a list of all kinds of names on it. We'll see what happens when when Trump gets in office. You're talking about high-level politicians, allegedly Obama, Hillary, other high-level people. A lot of these people are perved out. They're perved out.
Speculation, but in speculating, I would believe that would be the case.
Wow. So he was hated more by the government than by the mob. He was actually friendly with the mob.
Oh, sure. Well, why would the mob? Why would the street element hate him? Why? If you were friendly with, say, for example, Carlo, okay, and other individuals, okay, and you were there, you were ready to do your job, you were ready, when you were called, you came in and you produced these remarkable results. I would embrace you. I don't care what you did,
right.
As long as you could achieve the results that we need to accomplish our objective. You're okay by me.
Stay out of jail.
So I would say that if anybody would want to have hurt Roy Cohn, it would have been probably either a governmental aspect, element, or it would have been maybe an executive of some big company, or maybe in Hollywood.
What a lot of people don't understand, that judges and prosecutors were doing backdoor stuff with gangsters. Sometimes, if you had enough money, a judge or a DA would go away. It would go away. How come Mike Francis doesn't talk about that?
A lot of them were persecuted. These were very powerful men with a lot of money. And he began with him and Senator McCarthy, destroyed a lot of careers. I mean, you're talking about boatloads of money sailed out as a result of these guys getting blacklisted, couldn't produce movies, actors on the shelf for life.
Yeah, that's wild. I mean, when you hear stories about this guy, there's so many documentaries on him and interesting books on him. He is he's a very unique character.
Yeah,
very interesting to read about. Going back, John, I think
I'm going to be sure to watch that.
I think it'll be entertaining, especially for you to watch.
Absolutely.
Going back to when I go through the story, and I think about the young John, yourself, with your father.
Right.
Is it true that the first time you met your father, you were 8 years old?
No, that's not true.
Because he was gone for a few years. What was it?
Well, always met my father. I used to visit my father.
Meaning he was in jail. Did you guys go visit
well,
or no?
My first birthday, my father was doing a year in Riverhead. He was doing a larceny bid in, I think, auto theft bid, rather, in Riverhead. He did a year there. That was my first birthday. He was there. And then he came home for a brief amount of time. And then he went back in. In 1968, he got the hijacking charge. So I was 4 years old at that time. He went in and did, he came out in 72. So he did 4 years on the hijacking charge. So if you want to, he came home in March of 72. So that would make me just 8 years old. So most of my life, young life, my father was in prison. But like I said, I mean, I visited him regularly. My mother was dutiful. She was loyal. She always took us. She would pile us in the car. And my grandfather, one of my uncles, would drive us to Lewisburg, Pennsylvania. We'd pile in the visiting room. In fact, I've got, I still have several in my book, Shadow of My Father. I have a picture of me as a little buck in the visiting room of my father.
You could take pictures.
How often would you guys go visit?
Well, again, it's not like today. It's easy. It was far more accessible today. But back then, my mother would probably go every 2 or 3 months. We would go. She'd break the kids up. It was hard to take us all. So maybe I seen my father in the course of a year. I'd see him 3 times, maybe.
So
Possibly 4.
In your first 8 years, how long was he out?
First 8 years, we got 1, 4, 5.
2 or 3 years.
Say in and out. I would say by the time I was
2 years.
Well, I say this. By the time I was 13, he had 9 in. So
4
first 8
years.
years, let's say 5. But by the time I was 13, he had 9 in.
So 13 years old, he's only been with you for 4 years in the house where you come home, you see him.
Yeah.
Got it. And then at this point, you still don't know what he's doing. You don't know what business he's in.
He's different. He's different. He's absolutely different. Look, I mean, he walked different. He talked different. And it was remarkable. Because as I got older, I would watch my father and I would be in amazement. Like we would, we'll discuss that maybe a little bit later about the evolution of what he became. But at that point in my life, you look at him and you say to yourself, I know this much. I know I played Little League Baseball and I know my coach. I know my kids on the block, their fathers, who's a blue-collar worker, hard-working individual, whatever have you. I know how they've all comported themselves. Everybody spoke Brooklynese. Similarly spoke. But John was different. The first day he came home from Lewisburg. He was different. Brown Lincoln Continental. That's what he came home in, a chocolate brown Lincoln Continental. The car pulls down the block, pulls in his driveway. We live in a row of row houses, second off the corner, little green awning, simple house. And he gets out of the car. He's got a light brown mock neck, chocolate brown suit with a matching overcoat. And he gets out of the car with jet black hair. And I've described it in my book. It was Tony Curtis with muscles. He came out of the car and he looked and he just surveyed the area. He got out of the car. He shot his jacket. He fixed it, looked down. He saw, I waved to him. And he just walked like he owned the place. Like he never saw the house before. Because we moved there from South Brooklyn when he went to prison. So he found the house okay. He drove himself home, found it, parked his car, saw me, walked up the stairs like he always was there. Like he owned the place, literally, so to speak. So in watching him, and watching his mannerisms, watching how my mother deferred to him, look, he was different than my friends' fathers, that's for sure. That much I did know. So that's the foundation. And then as you get a little older, also, Pat, you become more perceptive, okay? People gossip and say, your father's in prison. No, my father's not in prison. My father's at a military camp, and he's in a construction aspect. They have to build things there. Oh, yeah? Okay. And then you evolve more and more. You become more and more.
When was the first time you realized he is really in prison? How old were you?
I would probably say maybe it struck me as a little odd, when I was 8 years old.
At 8 years old, got it.
Yeah.
Just kind of like a Santa Claus.
7 years old. I turned February of 72. He came home in March. And around that time, you understand because he's coming home. And you start putting the pieces of the puzzle together. Listen, we don't give kids credit. The kids today are a lot smarter than we were because they're stimulated by computers and everything else. And
the little kids. I was nobody, and I remember my daughter asking me. She was young, very, very young. And, you know, she was asking me questions. I was like, no, I'm educated. I sell steel at a steel company. I didn't say it was part of a gambling ring, but, you know, the gossip and everything with little children. But if it was today, the publicized the TV, the cable, and everything.
More an interaction in that respect, but they don't have the personal skills that we have in personal interaction. But they're literate. They read so much they can hit a button, true or not true, and they can find almost anything they want to find. But you start to put the pieces of the puzzle together, and you come to an understanding that everything's a little different here.
That makes sense, because even back, I mean, there's not internet. It's not like you're on TikTok. John Gotti, you know, was back in. You don't have access to that, right? You're living in this community.
Oh, then it was you either in the newspapers or it's like word of mouth. That's it. Now, Pony Express.
You go to military academy, in your is it 79 when you go? I think 79.
78 to 82, I was there.
Right. So when you go there, what's the story where you're sitting there and there comes a story on TV? Right. You know, John Gotti, and everybody's watching like, wait a minute, what was that story when that happened?
I was in the day room. And we had a TV. The TV was in the day room. So when we had some downtime, we weren't drilling, whatever have you, or playing sports, you go to the day room, watch TV. And I'm watching, and it was like an undercover operation. They talk about the garment center. And it had a picture of my father with a gray sport jacket on, and he had a bandage on his hand. Because he was here in Florida, and he knocked the biker out at a red light. So I remember that.
The garment center, my godfather was protecting a guy that was not in the mob, but he had buildings in the garment center that he would stash tons of pot. I didn't get along with the guy. He was a complete creep. But the garment center was used a lot. It was a lot of warehouse space, and sometimes it was protected. Now, if there was a lot of inventory and stuff sitting in a warehouse somewhere, there'd be a guard 24 hours a day. 24 hours a day, either because they used to have high fashion runway models with all these designer clothes, maybe on one side in close proximity. And then some of the gangsters had these warehouses in other people's names and things like that. But they could, whatever they were boosting, whatever they were grabbing, if there was large inventories of it, they had bales of marijuana at some of these places, tons and tons and tons of that cheap Mexican marijuana, Mexican back then. We're gonna do this in 3 parts. Thank you, folks, for coming in, hanging out. Big Yin, wise guy, huh? You're a wise guy, Big Yin. Game 3R, thank you. Vegas Pete, Joel Gold. We're gonna continue this. There's other parts in here. I'm going to find some other parts for tomorrow that I really want to elaborate on, because a close friend of mine told me some things I was telling him. And, you know, that's like not common knowledge on MobTube and all this. But he told me, yeah, it's in this interview. But I don't know where it is, but I'll find it and then we'll elaborate on that tomorrow. So hit the like button, notification bell, subscribe. There's a Cash App if you want to buy me a cup of coffee. There's a link to my book in the description. Everybody, have a good night.